Hi, this is Marilyn Woodruff with Knits Designs, and I'm here today to walk you through the different stitches that are found in the Flight of Fancy cowl. We will start with the provisional cast on. So this cowl will be created in a tube with a Mobius twist and then grafted. So we are casting on a provisional cast on. It's just a standard long tail cast on, but you'll cast that on with waste yarn. And then we'll take that out at the end and we'll use these stitches to graft the cowl together once we've put the twist in the cowl. So there's nothing new or exciting about the long tail cast on. You're just doing it in a different yarn than your main color or your contrast color. Make sure that it's a little bit slippery to make it easier to take out when it comes time for us to graft. Before we start in on the stitches, I want to talk a little bit about a jogless join. This is not something you have to do with the cowl, but there are a lot of places in this cowl where you will be changing colors between the main color and a contrast color. If you do nothing at those places, you're going to get something that looks like this, which, while it's not unappealing, given that this cowl might be twisted to where this becomes the outside of it at some point, it's likely that you're going to want to make an adjustment to make sure that all of these stripes become jogless. And this happens simply because when we knit around, we're actually knitting in a spiral. So the easiest way within this pattern to fix this is every time you do a color change, you're going to basically knit the second color with the one below to get this nice smooth edge, and as you go up the cowl you'll see these stripes all of a sudden no longer jog. So to work that that jogless stripe, you'll come to the end of your round, and then when it comes time to change yarns, you're going to change to your next color, whether it's your contrast or your main, and you're going to knit one round like normal. Do nothing special, just knit this round all the way around. I will meet you back at my beginning of round marker. Okay, I'm back at my beginning of round marker, and I'm ready to begin my second row of my color. And while I'm working this on the stripe section, this actually applies to any section where you're going to have two knitted rows together of the same color. So you can do this in the flower section. You can do this coming out of the Latvian braid sections. You don't necessarily have to do this in the Latvian braid sections because the color twists take care of themselves. But when you're ready to begin the second row, all you're going to do is you're going to take the right leg of the stitch right below, which is going to be in the old color, and you're going to just bump that right up on the needle. And then you're going to knit these two stitches together as if they were one. Oops. You're only going to knit them with the new yarn. So now it becomes the slip stitch. Oops, getting focused there. It becomes this slip stitch, and you have an elongated stitch that is the same length as that stitch. And then it will disappear as you continue to work this stripe, and you'll get this totally jogless version of stripes if you're working the stripes, or if you are working in a different section where the colors come in and go out, it will be completely seamless. Again, it's not something that you have to do, but it does tend to clean up the color changes and make it less obvious where the beginning of round was in the cowl. Next up, we will be looking at how to create the flower and the Latvian braids. All right, the flower pattern actually starts on round 6. So the first 4 rounds you'll make stockinette rounds in main color, and then you'll make 1 round in contrast, and then you'll be ready to start the flower pattern. So you'll knit 2, and then the flower itself actually takes several rows to develop. So the first row, we're going to make the long loops that become each of these strands. The second row will release a double loop from these strands. The third row will actually capture this middle strand as a stitch, and then we will knit a couple of rows, and then the last thing we'll do is capture these outside stitches as a stitch, and then we'll knit around in main color. So the first thing we're going to do is make our long loops. And these are going to be very loose. You're going to think that you're making them too long, but you're not. So after you've done your knit 2, now we're going to make our flower. We're going to use the second stitch column to make the flower pattern. We're going to count 4 below, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it'll always be this very bottom main color stitch, and we're going to knit into that stitch. And then we're going to pull that loop up really, really long. And then we're going to add a loop to it. So I'll show you that one more time. We're going to go down 4 underneath, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to knit into that bottom stitch, and we're going to pull that way out, more than an inch. And then I'm just going to catch it, and I'm going to double loop it to give it a little bit more length whenever I go to knit. Now I'm going to knit 2, and now I'm going to go and make that middle column stitch, which isn't quite as long as the first column, but I'm going to knit into the same stitch 4 below, knit into this stitch, and I'm just going to pull it up about 3/4 of an inch or so. Just pull it up the length of the needle, and then I'm going to knit 2, and now I'm going to make one final stitch into that same knit below stitch. This one's a little bit more complex because you've got to hold these 2 stitches on the needle, otherwise they'll fall off. So I'm going to knit into this stitch, pull that out. Oops, see, they fell off, but I got my loop. And then I'm going to pull this loop really long, just like I pulled the first one really long, and then I'm going to add a loop to it. That is all that there is to making these elongated loops. Now I'm going to finish by knit 2. Now I'm going to do another flower pattern for you. So knit 2. I'm going to go in 2 stitches in, so the second stitch in, the bottom column, right down here. I'm going to pull a very long loop out, and then I'm going to double it over my needle. Now I'm going to knit 2. I'm going to go back in that same stitch, and I'm just going to pull out a long loop with not the second loop. Knit 2. And now I'm going to go back into that same stitch below, and I'm going to pull out my loop, and then I'm going to make it very long, and I'm going to give it an extra loop over and knit 2, and my flower is done. You'll do this all the way around round 6. I will meet you at the beginning of round 7. Okay, I've made it back around, and now I'm ready to drop these extra loops. So I'm just going to knit 2, and when I get to this extra long loop, I'm just going to slip it off, and I'm going to slip off that extra loop and just let this be super loose on my needle. And then I'm going to knit 2, slip 1, and knit 2, and then I come up to my double loop stitch, and I'm just going to slip it off straight onto the other needle, and then I'll knit 4. Now I'll do it one more time. I'm going to slip the double loop stitch off, knit 2, slip the regular stitch, knit 2, and then slip the third double loop stitch off and knit 2. And I'm going to do that all the way around, and so I'm going to have a super loose stitch, a regular slip stitch, and a super loose stitch, and I'm going to have 2 stitches between each one of them when I get to the end of the round. I'll see you on the next round. All right, now we are ready for a round 8, and round 8 and round 9 are going to be identical. So you're going to knit 2, and then we're going to actually knit this middle stitch. We're still going to slip this edge stitch, and then we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we will slip this elongated stitch, and then we'll knit 4. Once again, you'll slip the very long stitch, you'll knit 5, 1, 2, 3, we'll knit this one, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll slip the very elongated stitch. And we will do this around 2 rows. So the next row, obviously you will already have knitted this one, but it will end up looking exactly like this on row 9, and then on row 10 we'll be ready to resolve these extra long stitches. So I'll see you on row 10. All right, now we are ready for round 10, and on round 10 we're actually going to finish the flower itself. So we'll knit 1 to get started, and then on this one, on the right side of the flower, we're going to do a knit 2 together, then we'll knit 5, and then we'll do an SSK, and that will lay these flower legs flat on top of the stitches that we're knitting them with. So we'll knit 1, knit 2 together. And you see how that elongated loop sits on top. Now we'll knit 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we are at our elongated loop, and we're going to SSK. I do a 1-step SSK, but you can do a 2-step SSK. And when you get finished, you will see the loop itself is now sitting on top of that second stitch behind it. So then we'll knit 2, and we're going to do a knit 2 together, knit 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, and an SSK. And once again, you see we have a flat loops sitting on the front of our flowers. Now, if your loops are not sitting flush like this, or there's any puckering going on back here, you're going to need to make your loops longer, because if it's puckering, it will not block out. If it's not puckering, but it does something like this after the fact, that's just because your stockinette's trying to curl, and that will block out. But when you're actually making the stitches, you can feel if these are flat and there's enough give to these stitches, they will stretch out and they won't pucker when you actually work it. But if these stitches feel super tight, any of the 3 stitches feel tight, or you see this fabric behind it, you're just not able to flatten it out, you do need to loosen up these elongated stitches. So that's why they need to be really long whenever we make them the first time, because however long they are determines how much space you have for all of these rows between. So make sure that those elongated stitches are really long. Otherwise you'll have a puckery fabric and you'll have to go back and rework it in order to remove that pucker. Okay, Latvian braids are much easier to work than they look when you look at them on the actual pattern. But you're going to see 2 different Latvian braids in this pattern. The first is right-leaning Latvian braids, which are cleverly named just because the V's point to the right. And the second is left-leaning Latvian braids, which are named because the V's point to the left. The only difference between a left-leaning braid and a right-leaning braid is the order that you work rows 2 and 3. So one of them is the exact opposite of the other, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I show you both of these braids. I tend to remember the left-leaning Latvian braid order by saying left over under, which spells the word Lou, as in the man's name. And then the opposite of that would be right. Let's start with the left-leaning braid. Both the left and the right-leaning braids start the same way. We are going to have both yarns to the back, and we are going to knit 1 by 1 color work, basically, starting with the main color. And so we will knit 1 with the main color, and then we will knit 1 with the contrast color. And we're going to do this all the way around, just main color and then contrast color, alternating until the cowl itself looks like we're just doing 1 by 1 color work. So we have the main color, we have the contrast color. Main color, my yarn is not cooperating. Contrast. And for both braids, this will be round 1. And you should end with a contrast color right here just before the beginning of round. Okay, I've gotten around and you can see I've got what looks like 1 by 1 color work all the way around my cowl. So now I'm going to proceed with step 2. And this is where the left and the right braids will diverge. So what you're going to do on the second round of the braid is you're going to twist the yarns up. And your yarn will become very twisted. But it's okay because on round 3, we're going to untwist them all. The difference between the left and the right braid is which direction, counterclockwise or clockwise, do you twist the yarns. So for a left-leaning braid, we're going to twist the yarns under each other. And what I mean is to start this round, you're going to bring both yarns to the front to purl, both of them. You're only going to be purling one at a time. And you're going to be purling whichever color presents itself on the needle. So in this case, this tan is my main color and the blue is my contrast. So I'm going to purl my main color with just the main color yarn. And now to make a left-leaning braid, remember I said L-O-U, left is over and then under. What that means is I'm always going to bring the unused yarn over the old yarn. Okay, so to do the next color, I'm going to bring the yarn over and purl. Now I'm back to my main color. So in my main color, I'm going to pick up my main color and I'm going to bring it over and purl. And I'm going to continue going over all the way around this round. So you can see, if you're kind of looking at the yarn straight on this direction, that I'm always going counterclockwise. I'm bringing the new color over the old color, every single stitch over. And you can see that it makes these little V's that point off to the left. This will become the bottom leg of that Latvian braid stitch. Okay. You'll have to forgive the change of lighting. The sun went down while I was making my first row of braids here. So we've come to the end of row 1, and your yarn is going to look like this. It's very twisty. And we've been always working over the previous yarn. Now, for the third row of a left-leaning braid, we're going to undo the twist. So before, when we did this, we always went over the yarn. Now we're going to go under. So every time you go to your yarn, you're going to move the new yarn under the old yarn. So one more time. Before, we were going the new yarn over. Now we're taking the new yarn under. So we're working it clockwise if you're looking at the yarn from the edge. So you're going to purl each stitch in the color that it appears, and every time you're going to move the new yarn under the old yarn. So our new yarn is our main color, and it's going to move under. Oops. It's going to move under. And you can tell that you're on the right track 2 ways. Number 1, your yarns will start to untwist themselves. But number 2, you will start seeing these V's appear. And just a word to the wise, if you are twisting your yarn the same way that you did before, your yarns will obviously get more twisted, but you'll also have 2 lines of identical looking stitches going on here. So instead of getting these V's that you're going to get over here as you go, it's going to look like 2 little hamburgers stacked on top of each other with a purl bump in between. So if you're confused and you're not really sure whether you're doing it correctly, take a look at how your stitches are presenting themselves. And if they're starting to present V's on the needle, then you're doing it correctly. And if they are looking like, stacks of wood going on top of each other, then likely what you're doing is you're continuing to go over. So those are 2 different ways, and sometimes it's kind of hard to tell if you've got yarns that are not high contrast. It's kind of hard to tell where the V's are, but you can always take a look and see if your yarns are getting untwisted. That's a clue that you're doing things correctly. So all the way around, you're going now to go under as we finish up our left leaning braid. Again, we're going under, taking the new yarn under the old yarn. So you can just remember which way goes which by left leaning braid L. The first row goes over O, and the second row goes under U. So you can remember the acronym LU, and you'll know which braid goes which direction. So we'll go all the way around, going under this time, and you can see I've got these little V's starting to appear right here where I've finished up that second round. And that's the left leaning Latvian braid. Okay, now we're going to talk about the right leaning Latvian braid. So when we looked at the left leaning Latvian braid, we started it with a row of color work that went main color, contrast color, main color, contrast color. You'll see in the right Latvian braid, we do the exact same to set it up. The only difference is the second row, instead of going over, we go under. And then the third row, to untwist, we go over. So I've already got it a little bit started here, but you're going to go under with your main color and purl one, and then you're going to go under with your contrast color and purl one. And we're going to do this all the way around, and your yarn will get very twisted. And then when we go around to the next round, we'll untwist it by going over. So from a row 2 and row 3 perspective of the actual braid, the right and the left braid are exact opposites of each other. All right, I've made it to the end of the first round of the actual Latvian braid, where you see all the little floats are coming across the front. And as advertised, my yarn is hopelessly twisted. So now to untwist the yarn on the right Latvian braid, because we went under for each of these, now we are going to go over. So we'll purl the first stitch, and then we want to put the second yarn over. And if you notice, because the way this yarn is plied, my yarn is presenting itself nicely to me over, just asking me to untwist it. So we're going to do that, and then we want to go over and over and so forth until you get to the very end of this braid, and you'll see that you have a twist or a braid that is pointing off to the right. As with the left-handed braid, if your little V's are making slashes or firewood instead of V's, and your yarn is not untwisting, then you are going the wrong direction, one way or the other. Basically what that means is you're going the same direction both times. So if you go over in the first row and then over in the second row, it's going to look like stacked cordwood, just whether or not you're working the right or the left side. That's exactly what it would look like. So good luck on the Latvian braids, and we'll see you on the next step. Okay, we finished knitting the cowl. We have our finished end over here, and now we're ready to pick up and graft from this provisional cast on. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of this provisional cast on. So we're going to do that by taking a second set of needles. You can use the same size needles, US 7, or whatever you use to match gauge. I prefer to do this with a smaller set of needles because it makes the stitches easier to pick up. You're not actually going to be knitting from the needles, so it doesn't much matter how much smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the first stitch that we made, what would have been our beginning of round marker. Because I didn't do a jogless join here, it's pretty obvious that this set of stitches right here is where I started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow these stitches all the way up, chugga chugga chugga, up to the top, and I'm going to find the end of my provisional cast on. And I'm going to pick up the first real stitch onto my needle. I'm going to go in the back side of the right leg, and I'm going to pick them all up back to front. And I'm going to do this all the way around my cowl. And This is one of the reasons why using a smaller needle is helpful. If you use the same size needle, it can get a little tight, but it'll be okay. It'll work out when it blocks. And what will happen is this provisional cast on will just slide around to the back, and you'll see all these live needles on your stitch, or live stitches on your needle. Whenever we do get to the end of the cowl, this little stitch here that's just hanging out will become a stitch. So make sure you're counting your stitches you pick up. You should have the same 96 stitches that we had when we get to the end. And once we get to the end, you'll have all 96 stitches on your new needle, and this provisional cast on will be rolled to the back. So once you get to that point, then come back and I'll show you how to remove the provisional cast on from those stitches. Okay, I've gotten around all the way, and now I've got 95 stitches on the needle, so I need to pick up one more. And when I look at my tails, this is clearly a stitch right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tug this little tail back here, and I want to find where this stitch is, and I want to pick up right here into this 96th stitch. So now I have 96 stitches on my needle, and I am ready to take off this provisional cast on. So what I'm going to do is just trim it off with a small pair of scissors, being very careful not to cut any of my live stitches. I just want to cut provisional stitches. You see this little provisional stitch right here. I'm just going to cut him. And then you'll be able to see this just start to unwind as we go around. Oh, come now. And then you will end up with 96 of these actual stitches on your needle, and we will be ready to graft them together with the other end once we put our twist in. So take off your provisional cast on, and I will see you back here with all of our live real stitches on our needle. Okay, we've trimmed off our provisional cast on, and now all of our stitches are live on the needle again, and we've got this tail that we've got to weave in. If we don't weave it in, by the time we get done with our graft, there won't be anywhere to weave it in. So go ahead and weave in this tail, and then we're going to work our Mobius twist. So what we want to do is make sure that the cowl is lined up to where the whole thing is laid out straight. And on one side you have the needles where you ended knitting, and you've got a very long tail here. And on the other side you have the needles where you just did your provisional cast on. So what we want to do once you weave in that tail is you want to put those ends together right side to right side. This is going to give you basically a tube. See, you have just a tube here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take one of those sides and we're going to flip it over one time, one turn. So you're going to get this twist in your cowl. You don't have to do the Mobius twist if you don't want to, especially if you're working in a non-superwash yarn. It might not be quite long enough. But with superwash yarn, it will be long enough for you to do this once we block it. So once you get this Mobius twist into your cowl, all right, I'm ready to graft, but I have a problem. Where I finished my knitting, my needles are pointing off to the right. Where I'm ready to graft, my needles are pointing off to the left. So I'm going to solve that problem simply by slipping 48 stitches, which is half of the 96 stitches, on this needle to where both of my needles are pointing the same direction. Okay, now we're ready to graft these stitches. We're only going to use the back of the back needle and the front of the front needle, and we're going to look at these in pairs. So you're going to be dealing with 2 stitches on the front and 2 stitches on the back at the same time. So what we're going to do is our yarn is attached to this stitch in the back. You're going to follow the same 4 steps over and over and over. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go into our front stitch knitwise. And we are going to knit it off the needle. So we're going to pull it off the needle. Now we're going to go in the second stitch on the front needle purlwise, and we're going to leave it on. So the first two steps of this are knit front off, purl front on. And my tail's getting lost here. There we go. So as you can see, I now have my first stitch down here, and my second stitch is purl front on. Now the third step and the fourth step deal with the pair back here. We are going to purl this one off, and we're going to knit the second one and leave it on. So to do that, we are going to go into this back stitch purlwise. And remember, I said we're going to purl it off. So that means that we are going to purlwise and then just let it fall off the needle. And now we're going to go into this back stitch knitwise and leave it on. And if you know the Kitchener stitch, you'll notice that I did not do the setup round. I don't want the little ear to poke out. So now I'm just going to repeat those 4 steps over and over. I'm going to knit, go in this stitch knitwise and let it fall off. The second stitch purlwise and let it stay on. And then in the back, purlwise and let it fall off, and knitwise and let it stay on. So here we go. I'm going to go in the front stitch knitwise, and I'm going to knit front off, I'm going to purl front and leave it on. And then I'm going to purl back off, and I'm going to knit back and leave it on. And if you see, I'm do both the front and the back stitches at the same time, helps a little bit with tension. So I'm going to knit front off, purl front on, making sure to not cause a knot. And then I'm going to purl back off and knit back on. And I'm going to do this over and over until I get to the very end of my stitches. And you can see as we're starting to go, I'm creating a round of knitting right here. So I will see you at the end. All right, I've grafted all the way around, and now I'm down to my last 2 stitches on both needles. So I'm going to graft these 2, knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on, and now I have 1 stitch left. I'm going to knit off this front stitch, and I'm going to grab that stitch, and I'm going to go back here and look at that very first stitch that I did, and I'm going to purl that with that first stitch. Then I'm going to purl the back off, and I'm going to find this first stitch I did, and I'm going to knit that with that very first stitch. And now everything is all put together, and so to weave in your ends, what you'll want to do is just weave ends through, and then you can go through and clip, and just clip it a little bit long, and then if you tug like this, that tail will slip right in, and you will be good to go as soon as you block your cowl to your measurements. Congratulations!